Stalking Susan, now your first book, it's based on a real murder in Minneapolis, yes? Or
Well,
sort of?
25 years ago, two women were killed in St. Paul, 2 years apart on the same date.
Wow.
They disappeared from one of the poorest neighborhoods in town, and their bodies were dumped in one of the wealthiest. And the murders were never solved. They weren't really considered important murders by the cops or the police at the time. They weren't, real high-profile cases. And about 10 years ago, I had done a story hoping to shake something loose and maybe get a tip or so. And that didn't happen. But when I sat down to write a novel, suddenly that Susan story came to mind. They were both named Susan.
And on the same, that's creepy.
And journalists, we like stories. We like closure in our stories.
Oh, yeah.
We like endings.
Yeah.
And you could argue we don't care if it's a happy ending or sad ending,
Right.
we just want an ending.
Yeah.
But that story had always stayed with me because there wasn't resolution to it. And when I sat down to try and write something and ask myself, what if? I thought, well, what if there were a serial killer targeting women named Susan?
Okay.
And that became Stalking Susan. And what was kind of fun is afterwards, I did a lot of radio and television interviews about the case and always reminded people it's unsolved, call the cops, they're still welcoming tips. And the cops started getting a lot of calls. See, some people are afraid to come forward at the time.
Yeah.
Some people see something and don't realize the significance until years later.
Right.
But they got calls, except they weren't tip calls. They were calls saying, when are you guys going to catch that Susan killer?
Uh-oh, so now the cops probably hate you.
And that isn't the kind of calls that cities like to get.
No.
So they had recently formed a cold case unit, and they assigned those cases to it, and they were able to use new forensics on the old evidence. When the cases happened 25 years ago, DNA was still relatively new, and you needed large samples. Now a pinprick of DNA is enough to run.
Whoa.
And they were able to do that with the evidence that was still in the storage locker at the crime shop. And they had an announcement to make, and that was that the good news was there was not a serial killer targeting women named Susan. Citizens of St. Paul, particularly ones named Susan, could relax, but each woman had had a separate killer. And they know now from the DNA that there were two killers, not one.
Wow.
Which means that for 25 years, two people have gotten away with murder. And they're in the process of running the DNA through the DNA felon database. But, we're going to see what happens.
Excellent.
In real life, reporters don't actually very often catch killers.
Yeah.
That's still something, a job for the cops. So in a way, writing Stalking Susan was like, fulfilling a fantasy for a journalist.
Yeah. Closure and journalist hero, heroine.
Yeah, because in fiction, we can have them be the
Right.
heroine. We can have them solve the case.
Yeah.